Well, good morning and welcome to the 2025 DieselWise Indiana Emission Reduction Program webinar. My name is Carl Lissick and I'm the Executive Director of Drive Clean Indiana. Drive Clean Indiana is Indiana's only designated clean city and community statewide program by the U.S. Department of Energy. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Drive Clean Indiana website, drivecleanindiana.org. As part of the U.S. Department of Energy's Vehicle Technologies Office, Drive Clean Indiana provides economic, environmental, and energy security by working to advance affordable domestic transportation fuels, energy-efficient mobility systems, and other fuel-saving technologies and practices. As part of our service with our membership drive, Clean Indiana will assist you with putting together your project and grant application. Please contact us if you have any questions on putting together an application or need some information. So before we get started with Mr. Sean Seals, please note that we will be taking questions during the webinar, so feel free to send in your questions via the chat function. I know most people on the webinar have met Sean. However, here's a bit of information on Sean. Sean is a senior environmental manager with IDEM. His responsibilities include conducting air quality outreach and educational sessions, criteria pollutant planning for 8-hour ozone and fine particulate, developing state implementation plans, and facilitating all transportation conformity issues for IDEM. He is also IDEM's primary contact for all things diesel and the administrator of the DieselWise and Indiana VW mitigation program. Sean is also the co-lead for the state of Indiana's partnership with the Midwest Clean Diesel Initiative. Sean is also IDEM's environmental point person for petroleum and alternative fuel issues. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Sean Seals. Sean, the floor is yours.
All righty. Well, thank you so much for that, Carl. I appreciate that. And good afternoon. I guess it is afternoon to everyone on the webinar today. I appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your busy schedules to listen to what we have to share about the 2025 DieselWise Indiana Emission Reduction Program. I know a lot of you have probably experienced either DieselWise RFPs or Volkswagen RFPs in the past. So a lot of this may seem pretty similar to you. And if it is familiar, that's great. But there are some subtle differences that we'll be talking about as we go through the slides. And Danielle is kind enough to move us through the slides. So there you go. I didn't even need to make the bing sound. So just a quick overview of the things we'll touch on today. We'll touch on, eligible applicants, who is actually eligible to apply for this funding. We'll also touch on the type of vehicles and engines and equipment that are eligible under the program, as well as what percentage of the total project costs the DieselWise Indiana program is able to cover. There are some what I'm referring to as 2025 key reminders. These are things that are maybe a little bit different than they have been in the past, or just things that we want to make sure that you are aware of on the front end so that it doesn't become a surprise as we get farther down the road if you are selected for a project. We'll talk a little bit about the vehicle replacement and engine replacement requirements, what you have to do with that older vehicle. And then quickly, we'll walk through what the process is as far as applying the steps in the process that we'll go through from your application to hopefully and potentially your selection for award. And then we'll just quickly walk through what the criteria for evaluation will be as we go through this program. And then finally, we'll quickly tuck on the timeline to give you a sense of what the timeline might look like here for this program. There we go. So eligible grant applications, this is one slide that says it all. And it's basically if you have a public fleet or a private fleet and you have a vehicle that is an eligible vehicle that we'll go over on the next slide, you are eligible for funding under this program. And the reason we bring that up is there are occasions where some of our funding opportunities are only for public fleets, only for private fleets and such. But quickly, let's touch on what our eligible vehicles, engines, and equipment for the 2025 program would be. So these are the types of pieces of equipment in your fleet that could be eligible under the 2025 DieselWise program. These would include Class 4 through 8 medium-duty or heavy-duty trucks, Class 4 through 8 buses, whether they be transit buses, shuttle buses, school buses, they all fall into this category. Tier 3 or earlier, ferry or tugboat marine engines. These would be marine engine replacements. We wouldn't be doing vessel replacements. It's just not something that we have the financial capacity to do through this program. Excuse me. Tier 3 or earlier freight switcher locomotives. And then also Tier 3 or earlier airport ground support equipment. This is something we've been doing a little bit more of, it seems like, each and every RFP cycle. And then finally, some of our more common projects here as of late are 8,000-pound lift capacity or above forklifts, as well as port cargo handling equipment. That could be material handlers. It could be a variety of different pieces of equipment that are moving things around in the ports. Okay. So let's kind of go one by one just to give a quick overview of some of the details around what these vehicles or equipment need to be, and give you some sense for what the amount of funding that could be available to you if you were selected for award. So starting at the top with our class 4 through 8 trucks, transit buses, shuttle buses, school buses. These need to be model year 2009 or older, and we recognize this is a bit of a challenge, simply because we are in the calendar year 2025. These would be pretty old pieces of equipment. The logic there is that vehicles 2010 and newer were pretty darn clean. And the emission reduction potential from those vehicles isn't quite what it would be if we were still able to address that older legacy fleet. Now, if you have vehicles that fall into that category, they also need to have been on the road and traveled at least 7,000 miles per year over the last 2 years. And then if we are talking about these vehicles, there are a few different ways that we could address these vehicles. That could be a vehicle replacement, it could be an engine replacement, or it could be an idle reduction program. So when we look at the vehicle replacements, if the vehicle that you are replacing your existing 2009 or older piece with has an EPA certified engine, DieselWise will cover up to 25% of the cost for that vehicle replacement. If that engine happens to be a California Air Resource Board or CARB certified low NOx engine, DieselWise would cover up to 35%. And if that happens to be a vehicle replacement to a zero tailpipe emission power source, also known as battery electric, DieselWise would cover up to 45% of the cost of that vehicle replacement. Engine replacement, in these categories of class 4 through 8 trucks, it's not real common to do engine replacements, but if one chose to do that, again, 40% if that engine was EPA certified, 50% if it was CARB certified. And then if you find a way to remove your existing engine and replace it with a zero tailpipe emission power source, that could get you a 60% return. And then idle reduction technologies on certain vehicles, we can cover up to 25% of EPA verified idle reduction technology. Next slide, please. I feel like we might have bounced one. Let's go up one. Can we go? We're going forward. Let's go backwards. One more, class 4 through 8. Okay. Carry on. Next slide. In my reorganization of my slides, I did some combinations apparently that I was not even aware of. So let's talk a little bit about ferry and tugboats. So ferry and tugboats, marine engines that are tier 3 or older can be replaced within the eligibility of the DieselWise Indiana program. Now, some of the key caveats here is they need to have been operated for at least 1,000 hours per year over the last 2 years. And I think one of the things I want to note and point out to make real clear to folks is when we look at the model years, And when we look at the number of miles or the number of hours that a vehicle or a piece of equipment must have been in operation, those are driven by EPA requirements. Since the funding that I am basically passing through the DieselWise Indiana program is EPA funding, we obviously have to follow those rules. So when you see those figures, there's not a lot of gray area in those. Those are EPA mandated figures. Now, on ferry and tugboat marine engines, one of the things that can actually be done is an EPA certified remanufacture system. Basically, that's refreshing the entire Tier 3 or earlier engine. Not something most folks are that interested in doing. But if folks are interested and they find a way to make that work in their operation, and that becomes really the challenge, could be receiving funding up to 100% of that cost. Vessel replacement, highly unlikely we would be able to be replacing any vessels. However, if you have a vessel that actually does fit within the confines of the funding source, we could do 25% of that cost if it's EPA certified engine powered, 35 if it's carb, and 45 if it's battery electric. I think one of the things that I neglected to include in one of the initial slides that is key, and I'll touch on this probably a couple more times just so it sort of sticks in our heads. We have only $750,000 available in this round of funding, and we're looking to make awards in the $50,000 up to $250,000 range. So with those limitations, that's why I believe vessel replacements are highly unlikely. However, engine replacements could be more feasible within those confines. And if that was the case in ferry and tugboat projects, we could be looking at 40% for EPA, 50% for carb engines, and 60% if you are able to transition to total electric. Freight switcher locomotives are pretty similar in a lot of ways to the marine engines as far as what the program can cover and will cover. With the remanufacture being potentially 100% covered. Same 1,000 hours per year requirement over the last 2 years. And that's when it says over the last 2 years, I want to be a little bit more clear in that, even though that language could be better in some of our documentation. That's 1,000 hours per year over the last 2 years. It's not an average. Each year has to have shown at least 1,000 hours. Now, if we're talking 1,250 hours in 1 year and 750 hours in another year, and that piece of equipment is still operational, that is absolutely a conversation that we can have with you. But kind of rolling on down here, switcher locomotive replacements. Again, because of the financial confines of the program, unlikely that we would be doing actual locomotive replacements, but what is potentially something we would be seeing here would be the removal of a locomotive from your programming and with the installation or the addition of a rail car mover in its place doing that same work. And if that's the case, you're talking about 25, 35, and 45% eligible funding under DieselWise Indiana, depending on the engine power source. Engine replacements, pretty much the same things. 40, 50, and 60, depending on whether it's EPA carb or electric. But idle reduction is something that is included here with freight switcher locomotives as well. And as opposed to the on-road scenario where we are able to cover potentially up to 25% for EPA verified idle reduction technology, in the freight switcher locomotive arena, we do have a little bit more room there, and we could be able to cover up to 40% of that verified idle reduction technology. Airport ground support equipment is another kind of interesting project type that we've seen a lot more of over the last several cycles. These only need to be operated 500 hours per year over the last 2 years. Same thing, we could be looking at equipment replacements or engine replacements. And the percentage of that DieselWise Indiana portion is built around the type of engine that is used in the equipment that is being replaced, or the engine that is replacing the existing engine in an existing piece of equipment that you are choosing to maintain. We have seen a lot of zero tailpipe emission, basically battery electric airport, so ground support equipment over the last several cycles of the Volkswagen program. So we know this is something that's getting a lot of interest lately as well. And then lastly, as far as our eligible project types, 8,000-pound lift capacity forklifts. These are the big guys, as well as port cargo handling equipment. Now, you'll see that it says located in Indiana ports, and what I want to reference to folks is the RFP is the really important part, and that's located on the DieselWise Indiana website. That goes into a little bit more detail about what a port is and how a port is defined. The definition of port is no longer really seen solely as water ports. There are things as known as land ports too. So be sure to look closely at the RFP and see if maybe your facility might be something that is classified now as a port for the purposes of funding and eligibility. Now, these pieces of equipment need to operate at least 500 hours per year over the last 2 years. And again, the equipment replacement or the engine replacement percentages are driven by the type of engine that is either in that new piece of equipment or the type of engine that you are choosing to install into your existing piece. So this is, I think this is an important slide for us to kind of keep a little bit more focus on these, as I'm calling them, key reminders. These are just things that we want to make sure we remember as we kind of move forward down this process. And I touched on this initially, that the RFP that's posted on the DieselWise Indiana site does supersede any of the general summaries included in this presentation. What I want to make sure folks are aware of is the RFP itself, when you look at eligible vehicle types, on-road, non-road, marine, locomotive, there are some highly detailed eligibility requirements that are in the RFP that are on the DieselWise Indiana site. That's what you want to rely on, not what you heard me say today generally. Another new feature, and this is another new feature that's kind of been passed through from EPA's more recent rounds of funding, and that is that the replacement vehicles and equipment can be gasoline powered. Historically, they had to be diesel powered. Now they can be gasoline powered as well. In most use cases, gasoline powered equipment just doesn't have the capacity to do the work that is necessary. And that's why most of these pieces are already diesel powered. But there may be scenarios where that makes sense for folks. So just be aware of that. No contingent funding will be considered. This is not new. And when we say no contingent funding, that is an example of, let's say you apply for a project, your project is $500,000, you're going to convert a piece of equipment to total electric, and your local electric utility is willing to provide you $100,000 towards that project if you are awarded. Well, that's contingent funding. So we can't look at that $100,000 as anything because it's contingent upon an award. If you bounce down 2 slides, it makes a little bit more sense, and I should reorder these, in that any third-party funds, and that would kind of fall into, any third-party funds would kind of fall into contingent funds, right? And those must either be in-house, they have to be in-house, and they have to be fully dedicated. So for example, if your utility company was willing to write you that $100,000 check and you can deposit it in your account and you can show that you have those funds in-house for that project, that is no longer contingent funding. Because it is in-house and it is dedicated to your application and your project. Again, no lease or installment purchase programs are eligible for funding. I know this one creates a little bit of confusion. The simplest way to look at why this doesn't work is that when a grant agreement ends, when the termination of the grant agreement comes to be, by state statute, IDEM no longer is in a position to be able to reimburse you or pay you for anything. So if you take out a 5-year loan on a 2-year project, you still have 3 years of installment payments or lease payments to make. We are not in a position to be able to help you cover those in any way. And for that purpose, no lease or installment purchase programs are eligible for funding. Bouncing down a couple bullets, in-kind matches will not be considered towards the applicant's required match. It's cash only. If it's a $400,000 project and DieselWise will cover 25%, that's pretty straightforward. We'll cover 100 grand. You have to cover 300 grand. In-kind matches won't count towards that. It's cash money only. And then there is a hard limit on the 10-page narrative for the application itself. Quick updates on vehicle and equipment replacement requirements, what we need to understand going into this so we're not surprised at the end. First of all, they're called replacement projects for a reason, so they cannot expand your existing fleet in any way. Those vehicles that we are looking at replacing, they must be operational. And that kind of ties back into our 7,000 miles, 500 hours, 1,000 hours, whatever it might be. They must still be operational pieces of equipment. They can't be dead on the back lot. They must be owned and operated for the last 2 years. You can't go buy a piece of equipment that's old and junky and then replace it. It has to be something that you have owned and you have operated for the last 2 years. And that replaced piece of equipment or vehicle must be scrapped or rendered permanently disabled or returned to an OEM for remanufacture, which doesn't typically happen. But that kind of guarantees that it is a replacement project. That shows us that that is the case. And then, of course, you're going to have to provide to us evidence of appropriate disposal or scrappage. Usually this comes in the form of pictures. Sometimes people will even send me a video of the destruction of that piece of equipment. And then there is a certified scrappage form on the DieselWise Indiana website that has to be completed. That's very straightforward, and you can work with your scrapper on that. Quickly running through the process of what the program kind of looks like. So the solicitation went live on January 10th, as everybody probably knows by now. Interested parties are going to submit applications according to the requirements and expectations of the RFP. The RFP has some very clear guidelines and guidance towards the end that talks about, step by step what should be included in the application. Then we're going to review and select that. We're going to get these pieces. We're going to first look to make sure that your program, your application is eligible for funding. If it is, then we're going to score it. Once they're all scored, then we're going to kind of prioritize the applications and we're going to select projects for award. And if you happen to be an award recipient, then IDEM is going to enter into a formal grant agreement with you to kind of identify what the expectations of both parties would be. And then the project partners will complete their project per schedule, scope, and budget of the grant agreement. The grant agreement will make clear what those timelines and such expectations are. And then once it's complete, you will submit a reimbursement request and we will make the turnaround of that. Next slide. Quickly going over the evaluation criteria. This is included in the RFP. You'll want to pay close attention to this. We are basically giving you the guide for how to score as well as possible in your application. Use this as a guide. That is its role, that is its goal, that is its intent. So cost effectiveness of the project, basically a cost per a dollar per ton of NOx reduced. NOx continues to be the focus, of course, when we're talking about diesel emissions here in Indiana. Transformational potential, just to give you a little insight into what that is, it says potential to improve or maximize effectiveness of newer technology. The long and the short of it is if you are transitioning from a diesel fuel to an alternative fuel or an electric fuel, you're going to score probably the full 15 points here. If you're just replacing diesel with diesel, you are likely going to score 0 points here. This is about making the projects transformational. The project's total NOx emission reduction potential based on the type and the use of the vehicle. The NAC sensitive areas as a percentage of current standards, basically where you're located, where this project is located. There's nothing you can do about that. That's just where your project is located. Projects of greater air quality concern are going to be the ones that actually will score better. Leveraging your resources, if you put a little bit more money in the game, you're going to score a little bit better there. If you're registered with the Secretary of State, you're going to get 5 points there. And if you are an active participant in MBE, WBE, VBE programming, you're going to get 5 points there as well. And next slide. Here's a quick rundown of what the schedule looks like. This schedule is in the RFP, so you can take a glance at this, but look closer at it in the RFP itself. Next slide. That's it. So at this point, I know that we're running up against our 1 o'clock schedule, so I will stop talking and let you all handle and facilitate questions.
Hey, Sean, could you talk a little bit about cost reimbursement? So again, a lot of folks that have questioned, when do they receive the money? If they are awarded a grant, how are they reimbursed, or how are they paid for these for that 25% or 35%, 45%? Could you just give a little detail on that, please?
Sure. So generally, what we tell folks is 45 to 60 days after I receive your request for reimbursement, you should see an ACH transfer into your account reimbursing you for the DieselWise Indiana portion of that project. And you can work with your friends at Drive Clean Indiana on how best to put together those reimbursement requests. And if you are awarded, I will kind of walk folks through step by step on the process. But from a timeline, you're looking about 45 to 60 days from the day I receive it.
And then one other question we always get is stacking of grants a possibility on this program?
Yeah, so these are federal funds. So as long as whatever funds may exist out there are not federal funds, they can be stacked.
Wonderful. Again, if anyone has any questions, please put it in the chat, or if you'd like to come off mute, please feel free to answer or ask your question.
We do have 2 questions from Julie in the Q&A section, so I'm going to go ahead and put those out there. It is the first one, looking at the RFP, she's not seeing a pre-2009 my requirement when the new truck is ZE. Is that correct?
And can you restate the question? Yeah, restate that question for me.
Yes. They are not seeing a pre-2009 MY requirement when the new truck is 0 emissions. Is that correct? All model years are eligible in this case? Question mark.
And that is a perfect example of why I identified the fact that the RFP itself kind of supersedes this general summary. I know the table that she's looking at, and if I was to try to present that table in a slide, people would just log off at that point.
And the next part of that question is, I don't see where non-road projects have a port CHE restriction or a definition of port. Is there such a restriction in this RFP?
I would need a little bit more information on what is being described as port CH, whatever it was.
Clean heavy duty.
Oh, okay. It was D. I thought I heard a C. So yeah, I'll go back and look at the RFP to determine whether or not that is explicitly stated in the RFP itself, but within the EPA funding guidelines, which is what we're living by here, it makes clear that there are land ports, there are water ports. So for example, a lot of warehouse locations do end up being classified as ports, land ports, that is.
And we did get a couple questions. Other than that, we have, are refuse haulers and charging infrastructure eligible?
Refuse haulers are eligible. We do not fund the charging infrastructure to make life much cleaner. And because of the amount of funding that we have available, we focus on the equipment side only.
And our last question, can an applicant apply for more than one project?
Yes, and what I would encourage the applicant to do, if it's the same type of vehicle or same type of equipment, they can absolutely include those in a single application. It is highly likely in those scenarios that we may make partial awards. However, if the types of applications or types of equipment are notably different, one piece is an on-road and one piece is a non-road, then I would encourage those to come in the form of two separate applications.
And Sean, one other point I just would like you to discuss would be the complexity of the presentation. I know in past DieselWise grants, you've always suggested if you don't have a professional grant writer, how you should still attempt to put in an application.
Yeah, I mean, what I've always kind of said is, I'm trying to think, I've said it a lot of different ways, but the worst application obviously is the one we never receive. I have funded projects that were handwritten in pencil on lined notebook paper. So while it's great that you might have a beautiful presentation in your application, it does not have to be that. If you actually have any sort of connection or relationship with Drive Clean Indiana, I'm sure you know that they can and I'm assuming will help you develop applications for submittal. But I can't fund an application if I don't receive an application. So a bad application still beats no application, if that helps.
Great. And thank you for that, Sean.
Yep.
So again, next slide there, Danielle. And again, I just want to say thank you to Danielle Hayes for putting our webinar together today. And so again, some of the upcoming things that Drive Clean Indiana is hosting is we've got this month, we've got the Indiana Clean School Bus Consortium webinar. So anyone that's involved with clean school buses throughout the state of Indiana, this is something that we will continue to do throughout the calendar year of 2025. And again, I know one of the programs that IDEM was recently awarded was through the Indiana Clean School Bus Consortium for electric school buses. And I know that grant is just in the process of being negotiated. So again, if you haven't applied for grants, this is just a very informational sharing type of thing and promoting clean school buses throughout the state of Indiana. So next slide, please. And then one of the last things, we will be hosting our kickoff meeting for the calendar year at the JW Marriott. We're calling it Fueling the Crossroads of America. And this is in conjunction with the National Truck Equipment Association. So folks that, again, unfortunately, this grant is due prior to this event. However, we would like to invite you to potentially attend this event because it will review our upcoming events that we're planning for the calendar year, some of the projects that we've been working on. There will be presentations from the U.S. Department of Energy from Washington, D.C. to potentially give you some overviews. And then again, there'll be a variety of things that we're doing in conjunction at the National Truck Equipment Association. The Drive Clean Indiana team, along with Go EV Indiana, will be having a booth at this event. And then we also have free passes available to anyone that wants to attend the National Truck Equipment Association. So anything about alternative fuels, clean diesel, if you haven't attended this event, it's probably one of the best events in the country. And we'd like to assist you by offering you some free passes to the floor show. But again, if you're interested, please reach out to us. We're going to have a great kickoff event on the 5th of March. So with that, I don't believe we have any more questions. Just again, wanted to thank Sean Seals for his presentation. Again, this presentation will be on the Drive Clean Indiana website. And if you have any questions, Sean had shared his information. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to assist you with your application, or also assist you with any questions. So with that, just want to wish everybody a happy new year. We look forward to a clean and prosperous transportation year, and a lot of great things that are going to occur. So please stay in touch and watch our website for upcoming events and webinars. So thank you very much and have a great day.